All right, thanks, Richard. I appreciate the opportunity to address you guys. You know, sitting downstairs at the panel, a lot of people that were coming by and talking to me, and I'm sure it's a number of the other people at the speed dating, how can I get in the industry? You know, what's my first move? Where can I go learn? Let me tell you and congratulate you that you are doing the first and best step that you possibly could be doing to get into the cannabis industry. Going to events like this at the Cleveland Cannabis College, getting involved with NORML, your local NORML chapter, getting out, networking with people, showing your face up at the regulatory meetings in Columbus, showing up at local city council meetings, showing up at your board of supervisors meetings. These are all things that are your first steps into getting involved in the cannabis industry, should that be your goal. So you're doing the right thing, continue to do it, and continue to network with people. My name's Dr. Jonathan Cachat. I started smoking weed in Ohio. I grew up in Avon, Ohio. I went to Denison for undergrad, and at that point decided to pursue what makes people who they are, what makes people different and similar. So I pursued a degree in neuroscience. After Denison, I went to Tulane University in their pharmacology graduate program, and was licensed by the DEA to perform biomedical research with Schedule 1 through 4 drugs. So any drug under the sun, I had it, I ordered it from the government, it was really fun, except if I wanted to get cannabis. Getting cannabis from the government was like pulling teeth compared to how easy it was to get heroin or cocaine delivered within 2 days, you know, set on my lap, just, oh, hey, we got a package, here you go. Like, it was nothing. Cannabis was a much harder substance to do research on. Went to University of California, San Diego, then up to University of California, Davis, where I was doing data science and data analysis, data integration for neurosciences and psychopharmacology as well. And at that point, while in Northern California, decided to transition into the cannabis industry. Started initially with lobbying and politics, working with regulators to develop better medical cannabis regulations, then ended up raising about $10 million, buying a farm in Sonoma County. We now cultivate on that farm, we perform extraction, and that's the brand of Flourish Farms in California. I'm back on the East Coast now as the president and CEO of CCV Research, and what we do is we provide designs and specs for sustainable indoor cultivation facilities. Sustainable meaning economically in terms of reducing your bottom line, and sustainable in terms of environmentally friendly. Today, Richard asked me to speak a little bit on some topic related to love, maybe, neuroscience and drugs, and so I just threw together some thoughts, and we'll run through that. You know, it's not, I have one more slide, you know, it's not a very formal presentation, but hopefully you guys will walk away with some food for thought. So who would say that you could be addicted to love? Okay. Who would say you could be addicted to heroin? Who would say you could be addicted to cannabis? Okay, all right. So as a psychopharmacologist, the term addiction is really sort of a troubling term, the way that it's used just in the general public, the way that it's reflected in the news. Along those same lines, as addiction, the term drug is also very ubiquitously used, but very difficult to understand the nuances, the way that a psychopharmacologist would approach it. So what I'm going to do is run through a little bit of neuroscience and bring that back into love and opiates and cannabis, and then we'll call it a day. Just a little bit of neuroscience. There's two fundamental dopaminergic pathways in the brain. The substantia nigra pathway that goes from the substantia nigra and releases dopamine up to the striatum. Degradation or destruction of the dopaminergic neurons here, or the cells that are here that release dopamine here, if those disappear, you have Parkinson's. That pathway is related to fluidity of movements. The Mesolimbic pathway is the one that we want to talk about and focus on the most. It starts in the ventral tegmental area, so this cluster of cells here releases dopamine to the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. The nucleus accumbens is known as the brain's reward center, and so a hit of dopamine or the release of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens is what happens when you feel something pleasurable. You need to be rewarded for your behavior, because in order to survive, you need to continue to do behaviors that keep you alive. So every time you eat, little dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. Anytime you have sex, a lot of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. But when you start talking about drugs, a lot of them can hit directly on the nucleus accumbens. So love is kind of a weird thing. When I started looking into neuroscience of love, they started dividing it up into 4 stages of love. And it's interesting because each stage has a slightly different reflection in the brain. Initially, that attraction that you have, those butterflies you get, is a release of adrenaline in your system. You're essentially activating your fight or flight response. Your pupils get big. You're basically being attended to something and want to investigate it further. As the courting and dating period go on, there's a slight sexual difference between males and females. Males get a release of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens for recording behavior. Then a hit of testosterone anytime they win the attention or approval of the mate, and vasopressin, which is a hormone that promotes bonding. For females, they get a hit of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens as a rewarding, pleasurable thing. Then they get a release of oxytocin, which is the same as the vasopressin, but for females, anytime there's like kissing or nurturing or any sort of behavior like that where the social bond is reinforced. That's during the courtship and the dating phase. When you actually fall in love, neurologically speaking, there's this hormonal cascade that is almost like absolute chaos. At that point, your cortisol levels skyrocket, which is your stress hormone. You get very anxious, but the amygdala, which is a portion of the brain that allows you to interpret your feelings and your emotional state, is actually suppressed. So your body's in this crazy heightened anxiety state, sort of like those butterflies, but you don't actually recognize it and feel it. But it would be why you really think you're falling for this boy or girl. You can't sleep at night. You're not hungry. You're just really ready to move to the next stage. So true love is characterized by an overabundance of activity, of dopamine falling to the nucleus accumbens as you enjoy each other's presence, you have children together, you have a strong social bond and a strong social network. If we compare that to, for example, heroin. Heroin bonds to our endogenous morphine receptors, and believe it or not, the majority of those opioid sensors are down in your spinal cord, but right there. So a hit of heroin goes right to the nucleus accumbens, bypassing the ventral tegmental area, and just dumps dopamine in that place. So it's addicting because it makes you feel good, and it makes you feel good because it directly, consistently presses that button on the nucleus accumbens constantly. If you've known anybody, and it's probably not far-fetched to say that, given the current state of opiates in Northeast Ohio, they lose interest in their friends. They lose interest in their relationships. They lose motivation to sort of nurture anything like that, primarily because their nucleus accumbens and the system, the natural system that your brain has to drive motivational behavior is being artificially taken care of by the artificial drug in that space. So heroin, direct activation of the nucleus accumbens. Cocaine, amphetamines, direct application of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. Love results in, through several pathways, the release of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. So how does that relate to cannabis? Well, 2 very interesting things that we have to start off about. The cannabinoid receptor, CB1, is found all over your central nervous system. In fact, they think it's the most abundant receptor in your brain. There's no other receptor that is found more than the cannabinoid receptors in your brain. So it's not just in your nucleus accumbens or over here in the substantia nigra. It is everywhere. It's all over the place. So you would think that scientists back in the day would say, shit, if this thing is everywhere, it must be pretty important. We better investigate it. Unfortunately, like I was explaining earlier, investigating cannabinoids is very difficult. And despite it being the most widely expressed G-coupled protein receptor in the brain, it is one that we know the least about. It is true, however, that smoking cannabis results in the release of dopamine at the nucleus accumbens, but it's much more like our love scenario, where it's the interaction of multiple pathways working together to eventually release dopamine in that pleasure center. So you do feel good when you smoke cannabis, But you're not sitting there like just tapping a button, getting dopamine hits consistently in the nucleus accumbens. So I bring all this up because can you be addicted to love? I suppose, because it releases dopamine in your nucleus accumbens. Can you be addicted to heroin? Yes, we all know that. Can you be addicted to cannabis? I suppose, but it's much less of a physical addiction. It could be more of a psychological addiction because it's not directly hitting the nucleus accumbens. But at the end of the day, when someone says addiction, to me, I think along the lines of how psychologists think of something. I mean, is it ruining your relationships so you're unable to go to work? You know, are you physically dependent on it? When someone to me says drug, you know, I'll get in an argument with my mom because she likes coffee a lot, but that's not a drug. That's not a drug. To me, anything that has psychological or psychoactive effects is a drug. Love could be a drug. Sugar could be a drug. So it really, for all of us, when we are out talking to regulators or you're dealing with people who aren't necessarily on our side of the cannabis issue, who say, oh, it's a drug, it's a drug. We're all drug users. What isn't a drug, really, in terms of a psychopharmacologist? It's difficult to say. So try not to let them pigeon you in a box that says you're a drug user. Any molecule that you take that interacts with your body could be considered a drug. And keep on doing what you guys are doing in terms of networking. You're doing the right thing, and let's hope that Ohio gets it in line. Thanks for having me.
You test on marijuana?
The restrictions on research with cannabinoids are a federal issue because of Schedule 1. That being said, states that have medical cannabis laws are allowing medical cannabis activity. Medical cannabis research is one of the things that they could allow. Typically they say, well, the university's got to do the research. Well, the university gets 60% of its funds from federal money, so everybody's sort of afraid to do it. In California, they had, and I lobbied really hard for a research class license to be made so private enterprise could apply to do basic science research with cannabinoids. It'll probably be something that we see in California in 2018, not now. So the timeline on real cannabis research in the United States, don't bet on it. Get a subscription to the Israeli journals. I mean, they're the ones that are, Israel is really leading the charge in biomedical research on cannabis.
Aren't they supposed to be coming to Berkeley or Harvard? They're going to be opening up a division within, I think, right?
Right,
for
yeah,
research?
and also the state of Pennsylvania, a major part of their medical cannabis laws was working with clinical researchers. So at Temple University, and I don't know if it's at Berkeley, but at UCSD, there's a medical cannabis research center.
But I mean, Israel specifically, I think, was supposed to be coming to Harvard. I think they're supposed to be opening up a division within Harvard or Berkeley or something, like this year or something.
That's great. Yeah, they're doing good stuff over there.
I thought Michigan was testing too.
I would say testing and analytics is different than basic science research. And clinical research is different than basic science. Basic science would allow us to understand the distribution of cannabinoid receptors in the brain. Clinical research would allow us to understand why is cannabis helping people with Parkinson's. Well, like I showed earlier, when you lose those neurons in the substantia nigra, that is Parkinson's. Literally, that's what Parkinson's is. Cannabinoids are neuroprotective, so they prevent the loss of those neurons in that area, but specifically how that happens, we don't fully understand. More importantly, the endocannabinoid system, with the distribution of receptors all over the body, is helping the body maintain homeostasis. Any disease state is a deviation from a homeostatic state, so you're not balanced. Cancer, off balance, pH is off balance, so you've got uncontrolled cell growth, it's a lack of homeostasis. So really, we're going to understand a lot more about human health once we understand the endocannabinoid system, and the timeline couldn't come soon enough, but I have no optimism for when it will actually happen in the United States. When we have the DEA or the FDA, you know, everybody's passing the political ball. It's not us, it's them, they gotta do it, and then they continue to come out and say this is a dangerous substance with no medical value that can't even be safely consumed with a doctor. You know, it's a lie, it's not true. So I think at this point they might just be embarrassed that it is so not true that they've just been keeping it going for so long. They just don't want to be like, oh, sorry. You know? So
the DEA
hopefully
took
soon.
all the lies off their website.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. Did that. Baby steps. Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Maybe they'll just forget that it was all illegal. Well, we're gonna, in case.